The champagne hadn't even been poured when my husband-to-be dropped my hand and said he was in love with someone else. There was a sharp gasp. The string quartet faltered. Then Delilah, my stepmother, walked in wearing a wedding gown. My fingers tingled from how tightly I was gripping the bouquet. Peony and sandalwood, the scent of betrayal. But what they didn't know was that I'd been here before. And this time, I came prepared. Where are you listening from tonight? Hit subscribe. If you believe karma has a favorite color, mine is black. They say betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from blood. But what if the blade is handed to them by someone you loved? My name is Sierra Vale, and the last time I walked down that aisle, I died 72 hours later. Shadowmere Glade wasn't just a town, it was a postcard. Lakeside mist, Victorian homes, church bells echoing through pine. To an outsider, it looked like peace. But peace is just silence before something breaks. I grew up in the White House on Hollow Birch Lane. My father, Everett Vale, was a real estate mogul. Old money, big reputation. My mother died when I was 11. And 6 years later, Delilah came knocking on our grief like it was a door she could walk through. She was 22, a former pageant winner with humble roots and a talent for making men feel like kings. I was 18, and suddenly had a stepmother younger than my college roommate. Still, I tried. Dad seemed happy, and I was too busy falling for Maddox to notice how fast Delilah was stitching herself into our legacy. Maddox Vale came into my life like a storm I thought I could tame. He was magnetic, brilliant in business, and devastatingly aware of how to make a girl feel like she was the only one breathing in a crowded room. We met at a charity gala. He wore a thrifted tux, but made it look like it belonged to him all along. I spilled Prosecco on his sleeve by accident. He just smiled and said, "Now we have a reason to meet again." Charming, so damn charming. And for years I believed that love like his had no price tag. I was wrong. After we married, I put my own design firm on hold to help him build his empire. I worked behind the scenes, pitched his vision, signed his deals. Even took meetings with investors who barely looked at me. But I didn't mind, because I thought we were a team. And in the home we renovated together with copper lighting and soft gray walls, I let myself believe I was safe. I still remember the scent of the linen spray. I used lavender and white cedar. I used to mist it on our pillows each night, never knowing how often another woman had been lying on mine. And that woman was my stepmother. The signs were always there like hairline cracks in marble. But I painted over them, again and again, until everything collapsed. In my last life, I found out the truth 3 days after the wedding. And then I found the staircase. And then I never found the floor. But that was before. This time I remembered everything. And I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to smile and let them believe I still hadn't noticed. Because they say revenge is best served cold. I say, it tastes better when they don't even know they're being fed. The first time I saw it, it was so subtle it could have passed as nothing. A brush of the hand. A glance held just half a second too long. Delilah had always been flirtatious, but there was something about the way she looked at Maddox in the kitchen that morning. He was pouring coffee. She was wearing my robe. And they both froze when they saw me standing in the doorway. "Oh, sweetie," she chirped. "I couldn't find the guest towels upstairs. Hope you don't mind I borrowed this." She didn't borrow it. She stole it, just like she'd soon try to steal everything else. Maddox cleared his throat, held out a mug. "Want some?" he asked. I took it without blinking. The mug was warm, but the way his hand trembled as he let go told me he remembered the last time he poured coffee for me like this. It was the morning after our wedding, before the fall, before the funeral. Before I woke up again in the middle of the night back in my bed a week before it all went wrong. At first I thought I was dreaming, but when I saw the bruise still on my hip from a fall I hadn't had yet, I knew. This wasn't a second chance, this was a test. And I wasn't about to fail. "Delilah," I said gently, "you know the blue towels are in the guest closet. Same place they've always been." She blinked, then smiled, too wide, too fake. I walked past them like I didn't feel the static crackle of tension in the air. Like I hadn't noticed how Maddox avoided my eyes. I had noticed, and I was keeping score. I saw the phone he always kept face down now. The late-night calls with the architect that ended when I walked in. The perfume I didn't wear lingering on his jacket collar. In my last life, these were the things that made me cry. This time they made me laugh quiet, cold, and in the dark. Because I already knew what they were planning. And I was going to let them think they'd won. Until the moment they realized they'd just handed me the gun and asked me to decorate it. Would you confront your husband if you saw your stepmom in your robe? Or would you smile and let them keep digging their own grave? Sometimes the universe doesn't whisper, it screams. And that night it screamed through the air vent above my father's study. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop, But when I passed by and heard Maddox say, "After the wedding, we flip everything," I stopped breathing. Delilah's voice was soft, sticky sweet. "Her name's still on the accounts. We need her to sign over full control first." Maddox laughed. "She will. She trusts me. She still thinks this is love." There was a long pause. Then Delilah said something that should have shattered me. "Once it's all in your name, we file for divorce. Fast, clean, done. And with her history, no court will believe she didn't consent." I stood frozen outside that door, hand pressed to the cold frame, heartbeat thudding against the bones of the past. So this was it. Not just infidelity, not even lust. This was theft, this was war. And the best part, they still thought I was the same woman they broke last time. I went back to my room, locked the door, opened my laptop, and pulled up the draft of the trust I'd written before our wedding. In my last life, I'd deleted it the night before we said I do because Maddox said prenups are for people who expect to fail. Now I clicked print. The next day over coffee, I said, "Let's make sure everything's clean before the wedding. No loose ends." I've had the lawyers draft a protection clause just formality. Delilah smiled as if on cue. "Smart girl," she purred. But there was a twitch at the corner of her mouth. Maddox hesitated, then nodded. "Of course, whatever makes you feel secure." He signed, Delilah countersigned, and I notarized every page. But what they didn't read was the rider I'd added at 2:37 a.m., the one that named me as the sole creditor to every business debt Maddox had forgotten to pay off. The one that ensured Delilah, upon legal union, would become jointly liable. I didn't need to ruin their wedding, I just needed them to say I do. Because I just married them to the one thing neither of them could afford. And if you heard the person you love plotting to rob you, would you confront them, or would you turn it into their signature trap? The florist delivered 24 white peonies, my favorite, Delilah's least. I'd ordered them myself. The morning of the wedding felt surreal, like déjà vu dipped in vanilla frosting. Same Lakeview terrace, same vows rehearsed, same guests in pastel and pearl. Except this time I didn't tremble when I zipped up the dress. My father took my arm at the top of the aisle. His hand was steadier than mine. He didn't know yet that the woman he married was about to steal his daughter's husband. Again, the music swelled, Pachelbel's canon. The scent of lake air and lavender floated around us as I walked toward Maddox, who stood nervous in his custom-tailored suit, eyes flitting toward the archway, not toward me. I reached him. He didn't take my hands. The officiant began, but Maddox stepped forward, cleared his throat, voice shaking more than I'd hoped. I can't do this." A murmur rippled across the crowd. Maddox turned to me. "I'm sorry, Sierra. I can't marry someone I don't love anymore." And then, he stepped out. Delilah, in white, my veil, my heels, my mother's necklace. The air collapsed. Guests gasped. Cameras clicked. Somewhere a champagne glass shattered. "Love isn't always polite," Maddox said. "Sometimes it demands truth." Delilah slid her hand into his, as if this were all part of the ceremony. My father clutched his chest. Someone screamed, and I smiled. Because I'd been here before. Only last time I hadn't known how the story ended. Now I did. I looked Delilah dead in the eyes as she smirked like she'd won. And I whispered, "Enjoy the honeymoon. It's already paid for." Her smile faltered, but it was too late. The photographer caught a perfect shot, me standing alone, serene in silk, while chaos bloomed behind me. And when the photos went viral, everyone thought the same thing. She's either a saint or a monster. Would you have stopped the wedding or let your husband marry your stepmom, knowing you already owned their future? They disappeared for 3 weeks. Santorini, Maldives, Lake Como, posting sunsets and champagne hashtags like "Patch finally free," as if they were the ones who had escaped something. Meanwhile, back in Shadowmere Glade, I went to work. Maddox had no idea how many contracts were still in my name. He'd assumed I'd sign everything over like I had in the last life. But this time, I'd left a trail of breadcrumbs, and every crumb led straight to me. I started with Haven Development Group, the first company Maddox and I built together. He thought he owned it. Technically, the parent corporation did. And that corporation now had my initials on every share. Within 10 days, I'd frozen 3 of his active projects under financial review. By week 2, I'd called in 4 outstanding debts, each one with Delilah's name tied as guarantor, thanks to the rider they never read. Meanwhile, Delilah tried to play perfect wife, hosting luncheons, wearing pearl earrings like a badge of new wealth. But I knew the look behind her eyes. I'd worn it once too. It's the look of a woman who suddenly realizes the castle she just moved into was built over a sinkhole. Then came the calls. "Mrs. Vale, we can't seem to reach Mr. Maddox Vale. Are you still the primary liaison for contract renewal?" I was. And I renegotiated, not out of kindness but out of precision. One by one, I met with his former clients, told them the truth, offered better terms, and watched them walk away from Maddox like he'd never existed. All while he posted selfies from Greece. He didn't even realize he was bleeding until the contracts dried up, until the payments stopped, until his office door didn't recognize his thumbprint anymore. They say karma takes time, but sometimes karma has an assistant. And this time it wore red lipstick and signed with my name. They thought I'd vanished, that I was nursing my wounds in silence. What they didn't know was that I was already halfway done, turning their empire into ash. He showed up at my office looking like a man who had forgotten how to sleep. Maddox Vale, in a wrinkled suit, eyes sunken, tie missing, hope dying. "Can we talk?" he asked the receptionist. I didn't make him wait. The glass door slid open, and when he stepped into my office, he looked around like it used to belong to him, because once it had. Now every inch of it screamed my name from the velvet couch to the brass nameplate. "Sierra," his voice cracked. "I need help. I know I don't deserve it, but please." Delilah didn't know. The debts, the lawsuits, she's scared. I leaned back in my chair, crossed one leg over the other, tilted my head just enough to enjoy the moment. "You married her," I said. He swallowed hard. "She didn't read the documents, she thought. She thought what I cut in. That gold came without weight, that love meant immunity." He lowered his eyes. "Please, we could lose everything." I smiled, "Then let her carry it. You chose her. Now let her carry your burden." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. For once he had no spin, no excuse. Delilah called me the next day crying, begged me to release the liens, said she didn't understand how business worked. I didn't answer. Instead, I mailed her a copy of the contract with a sticky note that read, "At page 12, clause 4, you signed it in rose gold ink." That was the moment they realized this wasn't just punishment. This was precision. Revenge doesn't require rage, just records. Every piece of paperwork Maddox had ever tried to bury, I resurrected. Loan documents, partnership clauses, emails he wrote at 2 a.m. when he thought no one was watching. They weren't just receipts. They were weapons. I started by contacting Hollowgate Finance, the private lender that Maddox owed over $700K. The interest rate was bleeding him dry, but because I had purchased the debt through a holding company, they didn't know it was me. Yet. Next, I filed a civil injunction, claiming misrepresentation in the purchase of marital assets. That froze his accounts for review. The courts didn't ask many questions because the documents were airtight. Drafted by me, signed by him. Then came the coup whispers. I met with Tanya Holmes, a freelance journalist I knew from undergrad. Real estate mogul caught in a scandalous triangle with stepmother and legal loopholes. She smiled like I'd just handed her a headline made of gold. The article dropped 3 days later, from penthouse to pitfall. How one man's greed cost him everything. #viral within hours. Comments flooded in. "Is this real? Who marries their stepmom? This Delilah chick belongs in a telenovela." Delilah shut off her Instagram. Maddox made his private. But the internet remembers. Meanwhile, I scheduled meetings with every one investor he'd ever ghosted after getting funded. I presented polished legitimate offers through my newly minted LLC of Vale Interiors. They didn't even hesitate. Within 6 weeks, 7 contracts left his hands and landed in mine. And the best part, Delilah started to panic. She emailed me at midnight. "Can we talk woman to woman?" I forwarded it to my lawyer. Maddox texted me. "You've made your point. Stop, please." But I wasn't done. They still had the house, the Lakeview property that had once been my sanctuary. I had poured my soul into those floors, those walls. And now they walked around barefoot on the hardwood I'd handpicked. So I made some calls. Delilah's name was never on the deed. My father's trust, which owned the land, still had my power of attorney. Delilah thought marrying Maddox would grant her squatter's rights. She forgot I had the original will. I scheduled the inspection. I printed the eviction notice. And I delivered it in a cream envelope tied with a silver ribbon. The same ribbon Delilah had stolen from my bridal shower to wrap her gift to Maddox. Irony, I found, has excellent handwriting. When they opened the door, Delilah was wearing a silk robe. Again. And Maddox looked like he hadn't slept in a month. "Hello," I said simply. Delilah's face drained. "You can't just show up." "I'm not here for tea," I replied. I handed Maddox the envelope. He didn't open it right away. He just stared at it like it might bite him. "What is this?" he asked. "Your wedding gift," I said. He opened it, read the words. Delilah looked over his shoulder and let out a sound between a gasp and a shriek. "You're evicting us," she cried. "No," I corrected. I'm reclaiming what was already mine. In the days that followed, they tried everything. Threats, tears, lawyers, but I had anticipated every move. I had receipts for every transaction audio of every damning confession and a digital trail that led only to themselves. By the end of the month, Maddox had filed for Chapter 13 bankruptcy, and Delilah was served with a subpoena regarding misappropriation of family assets. Her high society friends stopped inviting her. Even my father, who had once defended her, refused to speak her name. They had spent years trying to break me quietly, methodically, and I'd returned the favor with the same grace and precision they once mistook for weakness. I didn't burn their world. I just turned off the oxygen and let them choke on their own smoke. And in the end, I gave them a wedding gift. An eviction notice. You'd think after losing their home, their business, and their reputation, they'd stop. But narcissists don't retreat. They reload. Delilah resurfaced 3 weeks later at a wine gala hosted in downtown Seattle. I wasn't supposed to attend, but Roman invited me. Roman Thorne, financial strategist, elegant in black on black. A man who didn't need to speak loudly to be heard. We had been introduced months ago, at first through mutual business, then something gentler. He didn't ask about Maddox, he didn't praise or pity me, he just saw me. So when Delilah saw me arrive on Roman's arm, her face crumpled in that trademark mix of fury and desperation. She waited until I went to the powder room, then she pounced. Roman told me later she touched his lapel and whispered, "Are you sure you're not just her rebound? You know she used to be married to my husband, right?" He smiled. "I'm aware. I also know you used to sleep in your stepdaughter's bed." Delilah turned crimson. "She's playing you," she hissed. Roman leaned in. "You're talking to a man who audits for a living. The only thing she plays is long-term strategy." Delilah stormed off, straight into a camera flash. Unbeknownst to her, the event was being covered by Seattle Social Digest, and the photo of her mid-sneer clutching Roman's sleeve made front page with the caption, "Vale's ex-madam makes a scene again." Within 48 hours, Delilah was blacklisted from 2 major charity circuits and quietly removed from the board of a lifestyle brand she had begged to join. Maddox wasn't doing much better. After the bankruptcy, he tried to launch a new business under a fake name, but I had already reported his pending violations to the state licensing board. He was slapped with a 10-year ban from commercial development for undisclosed debts, misrepresentation, and ethics breaches. His phone number leaked. Clients called, partners withdrew, his LinkedIn went dark. Last I heard, he was consulting for a landscaping company 3 towns over, driving a borrowed truck, paying off credit cards with borrowed money in someone else's name. Meanwhile, Delilah moved into a studio apartment above a laundromat. Word is she teaches a branding basics workshop at a community college twice a week. And me, I never posted a single update. No revenge monologue, no cryptic captions, no public takedowns. Because the world saw it all without me lifting a finger. My silence said more than any gotcha ever could. And one day, months later, as I walked out of my studio, after a long pitch meeting, Roman waiting at the curb, engine humming, I saw her across the street. Delilah, in flats, holding a grocery bag. She saw me, then looked away. That was her punishment, that she had to live in a world where I still existed and she had to shrink every time we breathed the same air. Roman rolled down the window. "Everything all right?" I smiled. I almost feel bad for her. Almost. He laughed. "That's the coldest thing you've ever said. And also, the hottest." We drove away. And that was the last time I saw her. Because sometimes you don't need to bury your enemies. You just have to outgrow their grave. Peace doesn't always arrive wrapped in silence. Sometimes it hums gently beneath the sound of your own voice rising again. 1 year later, I stood on the red circle of a TEDx stage in Portland. The topic, how to rebuild without noise. I didn't mention names. I didn't need to. The internet already had. The talk went viral in 3 days. A clip of me saying, "Closure isn't a conversation, it's a decision," was stitched into 1,000 reels, duetted with breakup montages and healing playlists. They called it the softest revenge in heels. Roman was in the front row. My father, too, he had quietly filed for divorce 6 months after the scandal. He said it was the first time he truly saw who Delilah was. We don't talk about her, not because it hurts, but because it doesn't matter anymore. One afternoon, I received an email. The subject line just said, "I'm sorry." It was from Delilah. I didn't open it, didn't forward it, didn't delete it either. I let it sit there quiet, unread, like an apology that no longer had an audience. Instead, I closed my laptop, walked barefoot across my new studio floor, Sunlight catching the glass awards on the shelf. A vase of fresh peonies on my desk. Freedom doesn't always feel like fireworks. Sometimes it feels like waking up and not flinching at your own reflection. Have you ever forgiven someone silently? What would Reddit say? Drop your vote, subscribe for more.